Hello everybody, in this episode of Kitchen Pedagogy I want to talk about cold calling and particularly the spirit of cold calling, because like any strategy, unless you get it right, it doesn't work as well and actually can cause some problems. So we need to imagine doing cold calling well. I want to describe a scenario where cold calling is already an embedded part of how lessons happen. So essentially, when cold calling is normalised and it's at a mature stage, students recognise that when you're asking questions in class, the questions are for them to think about, because it's normal for the teacher to invite anyone they choose to respond to the question. The teachers know that if you get it right or wrong, that's fine, because if you're not sure, the teacher welcomes that and it's an opportunity to help. But also they know that they can't just sort of sit out, they can't hang back, they can't just allow other people to do the thinking for them, because it's expected that you participate and you're part of the class, but it feels safe for that to happen. The teacher regularly scans the room looking to see which students that they haven't called on recently, and they want to invite them all in. A key purpose of cold calling is to make everybody feel that they belong, that they matter, that they're in the right place, and to be constantly thinking, who's not sure? Is anybody not with me? Is anyone having problems? And to use the cold calling, not to catch people out, but the opposite, just to sort of flush out error, uncertainty, and to check for understanding. So cold calling goes hand in hand with a culture of error. Now in that situation, the mechanics are quite straightforward. You ask a question to everybody, so you want to know what people are thinking and their thought processes, not just right or wrong answers, but thinking, the process questions that Rosenshine talks about, for example. So you might ask a question like, what's 7 cubed? And you don't want just a straight factual answer, which is 343. You want to know the method that people are using, how they sort of visualise that and what they're thinking. It might be a more elaborate question like, what's the difference between climate change and global warming? Or are there a number of different factors to discuss? So you float the question so that you can engage live with the students and respond to the things they say in order to be sure that you've taught it effectively. That's different from, say, setting them a question to write and then checking their responses from that, which is a different type of process. It's in this responsive moment where I'm in the middle of explaining something that I need to get some feedback about the level of response and the sorts of answers students have got. So I float the question. I build in a bit of thinking time, and during that thinking time I'm kind of scanning the room, just sort of eye contact with people, making sure they're kind of with me and thinking, and then I select, and I do it in a very invitational way, and I'm very deliberate about this. I'm not trying to make the students feel awkward, and again, in the mature state, this is normal, they expect it, so it's not a big deal. So Michael, what were you thinking? Did you get an answer? I might say, or I might say, Have you got an answer? What do you want to share your thoughts? Or it could be something which says underneath, if you're not sure, it doesn't matter. So what were you thinking is my favourite way of doing it. Susanna, what were you thinking? Did you get an answer? And she might say, yeah, I think it's 343. Well done. Now, I don't just say, great, now what about you? Because that's just the beginning. I say, great, so what was your method? And I go straight in with a follow-up. I listen to what she said and I follow up. If it's a question about climate change, she might just say something about, climate change is to do with the weather and global warming is about the earth heating up, which is, not wrong, but there's more to say. So I say, yeah, that's interesting. So is one a cause of the other, or is it the other way around, or they just happen together? And I follow up. I get her to think a bit more deeply, and then we've got a discussion. And then I ask somebody else the same question. Even if Susanna knows 7 cubed is 343, I don't know what James thinks. And so I might say, James, what did you think? Susanna gave us an answer, what was yours? And he has therefore got to listen to her. And again, I'm normalising the fact that when somebody speaks, somebody else listens to that. And not only do they have to maybe contribute their own thinking, they have to respond to other people. And this is create a community of people who are together in a room, in a shared space, listening to each other, respecting each other's answers. And that's safe and normal. If Susanna's wrong and she says it's 353 or something, I say, well, not quite, that's close. What were you thinking though? Because, it's wrong. So now let's talk it through. And that's normal. So I have to normalise mistakes. I don't make a big fuss out of it. I don't make her feel horrible. Now she might feel like I wish she got it right. But that's how we build students' resilience. They don't have to feel terrible for long. But we can't just say, oh gosh, isn't it so terrible if I'm wrong that I'm sort of crucified by that forever? Well, no. We have to allow students to experience the feeling that it's okay to be wrong, and therefore we normalise that, we get over it, and they build some resistance to that, and they get more confident with it. So cold calling in a mature state is totally normal. It allows you to control who's answering, bring people in, make them feel involved, and definitely not allow certain students to dominate. We don't have calling out, we don't have hands up, and we don't have students sort of sitting out thinking the question and answer is some sort of event they're watching that they're not involved in. And I think that's important. I think that's the most inclusive way to run a classroom. Now, people always say this. They say, what about the students who are unsure? What about the students who are shy? What about students who are introverted? Now, of course, what we have to do is we have to build those students up so that they can participate confidently. And there are lots of ways of doing that. One of the most powerful ways is to cold call by spinning off other responses. So if you've already seen students' answers, then you can affirm their correctness and then get them to elaborate. And that's one of the most useful ways of doing it. So you might have circulated in a classroom and seen a good response, a piece of writing or a correct answer. Or if it's in a remote lesson, you might have seen their answer on a response that's electronic or in the chat, and you're saying, that's a great response. Do you want to just share what we were thinking? And the student already knows their answer is a good one, and they're more likely to be able to answer. That's a very important technique. It could have been when you've had a whole class response method like mini whiteboards, 3, 2, 1, and show me, and you're looking at everyone's answers, and you're looking at the students who are perhaps more introverted or lacking confidence, and they've given you a good answer, and you're saying, hey, that's fantastic, Michael, share us your answer, that was really good. What have you put? And they just have to tell you what they've already said. And they already know they're correct, so they're not worried about it, and it just builds their confidence in sharing in public. So if you can cold call based on some preliminary source of response, that can be really powerful for those students who are less confident, rather than revealing their answer for the first time publicly. It could be through pair share. So you use a lot of pair discussion, and you're saying to the students, you talk this through, and you might deliberately listen in to the less confident students on purpose to pick up on their answers and then maybe represent them in the room. Michaela had an excellent point. What she was saying was, and Michaela feels represented, but she didn't have to say it. But then that builds her confidence, and maybe next time she is happier to volunteer that answer herself. So you have a strategy for those students to bring them in, rather than them feeling vulnerable. But over time, the goal is for them to be part of the cold calling and normality, which is just very, very routine. And of course, then you might set some extended writing tasks or tasks where they practice and they're all doing things. So the cold calling isn't forever. It's not throughout the whole lesson. It's that moment when you're trying to suss out whether the students have got it enough for you to stop that particular phase of instruction and move on, or move on to the practice. And it's that responsiveness which is so key. And just relying on one or two students who are just naturally volunteering answers or calling out doesn't reinforce culture of error. It doesn't allow all students to feel that their voices can be heard. And you definitely get students who identify as the non-responders, and that becomes quite a deep habit, which is then harder for them to break later on. So I really think cold calling is powerful, it's inclusive, but it's done in the right way. We're not trying to catch students out. We're trying to bring them in. We're trying to get them to share their thinking and their feelings and their understanding in the most honest and open way possible. But of course it is public, and therefore there is a sensitivity around that, and you've got to build the culture, build the supports for people who find that harder. If you're not cold calling routinely, I often find that is one of the main things teachers can start doing, which makes a big difference to them, because it does reveal to them students who are finding things harder. It does wrap more students into the flow of the discourse, and it gets students saying things, practicing things. It's very often a suggestion I make to teachers about something they might try to improve their teaching, and subsequently they say that it's made a big difference to them. but it's something for you to think about if you're not already doing it. Or there are some of these techniques. A couple of methods to finish with is just where there are variants of cold calling that I've picked up from Doug Lemov's Uncommon Schools training with remote learning, which I just think are really, really great. So one of them is pre-call. One way to tee students up in advance and to get them ready is to say, well, I'm going to read this passage, or I'm going to show you this example, or we're going to watch this video clip. And Stephanie, I'd like you to just summarise for us at the end. So it's your turn to kind of lead the discussion. And so Stephanie is already, she's teed up, and she's thinking of that a little bit harder and getting ready. And that's useful because it gives her an advantage to sort of be the first one. And then while she's talking, other students are then getting a feel for what's being said, and it's easier for them to join in afterwards. So you're giving the first person a kind of head start of the thinking, and everyone else can follow on. So pre-calling is really powerful. And the other one is batched cold calling. And I actually think I'd probably use this more now than before, having used it on Zoom a lot, is where you tell a few students in a batch that they're going to be asked to answer. It does a couple of things. It makes you ask more students, but it also gives them more time to think. So you'd say, okay, I've explained this question. Let's see whether we've understood it. I'm going to come to Harry, then Safian, and then Daisy. Okay, so Harry, Safian, Daisy. Okay, let's see. So Harry, what were you thinking? And then Safian and Daisy know that Harry's talking. They know they're coming up next. Buys them a bit of time. Again, the rest of the class know that I could still spin off to them to check for understanding. But you've got 3 students who I've named who are kind of a bit more alert and ready, got a bit more time to think, maybe sort out their camera if it's a remote lesson. But it also makes me do it. I'm sort of more strategic in who I've asked in the first place. And it helps me spread the questions a bit more effectively because I've got batches of students that I've asked in a go. It's a bit like in a meeting where someone says, we'll come to so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. And everyone knows their turn is coming, and it makes everyone a bit more relaxed about this sort of the order of who's about to speak. So batched cold calling is really useful alongside the pre-calling. It's just something else to add to the mix.